So because we have, this astonishing dimension within us, this astonishing depth within us, which is our capacity for conscious transcendence, the movement of transcendence. It, we recognize that we have dignity. And I want to emphasize here that that this recognition of dignity is fundamental for developing the various aspects of peace. And I want to just articulate these four, which I think are fairly fundamental. Others we could identify others as well, but the first consequence of recognizing this amazing thing that each of us is, which is a human being, the first consequence of recognizing it is the recognition of human rights, right? And that is explicit in documents like the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we just looked at. The second is that we develop ever more greater capacity for compassion and kindness. Right? If we recognize in others the same dignity that we have in ourselves, we recognize this amazing capacity that we have in ourselves, this dynamism of self-transcendence and reason and conscience, as Kant puts it, then the recognition of that in others, because it's a species phenomena. Karl Marx said that the most important thing that we can be concerned with is thinking in terms of our species being. That's what he called it, our species being. That we are all human, we're all the same. That's part of moving to the world-centric level of consciousness in the model of development, of moral and cognitive development. We become world-centric, and this world-centric level can recognize a universal dignity and universal human rights, and therefore its capacity for compassion and kindness is continually magnified. We continually develop ever greater capacity for compassion and kindness. And the third consequence that comes from recognition of dignity is nonviolence. Right? Of course, Gandhi is the most famous, perhaps the father of this idea. He recognized the Atman in people, right? The Atman, that we are all manifestations of the divine. And in doing this, he insisted that it would be impossible to use violence against another person precisely because that person shared with us the sacred dignity, the sacred capacity. But it's not necessary to limit, to use any one set of ideas in the recognition of dignity, because they can be articulated, this can be articulated in many ways, right? Humanists, for example, atheists, people who don't want to talk about the Atman, they have very often in history, they have recognized human dignity, this special feature of human beings that has to be the foundation of our peace work and our foundation of our understanding of ourselves on planet Earth. So this dignity results in nonviolence. If people really have dignity, if they really are ends in themselves, how could we organize in terms of military, for example, military of this country or that country, which is willing, in order to defend whatever principles, they're willing to kill, they're willing to bomb, they're willing to destroy the life support systems of people in other countries? Well, there's something problematic here. If everybody has this intrinsic dignity, what right do they have to do that? It's very problematic. right? And then the fourth consequence of dignity that I want to emphasize here is the capacity for dialogue directed toward mutual understanding. Right? Dialogue is fundamental to establishing, creating, promoting peace. And the most famous promoter of this was perhaps Jürgen Habermas, the great German thinker, who, in his study of language and the human capacity for language, uh, discerned that the capacity for dialogue directed toward mutual understanding is more fundamental. It's primordial. It's what makes language possible, he said. And the secondary dimensions of language, when we use language as an instrumentally, instrumentally means we treat the object of our speaking as an instrument that we can manipulate, or we use our language strategically. Like nation states will negotiate with one another strategically to try to get the best deal, or business negotiations will be strategic, and so on. Those levels of language, Habermas said, are parasitic upon the most fundamental feature of language, which is its capacity for real communication, real mutual understanding. Not language used to manipulate you, to get you to go along or with me or whatever, but language in which we really come to some sort of a communion, some sort of a mutual recognition that's more fundamental than anything strategic. And the recognition of dignity of people, I think, is also foundational for this. If I really understand that other people have this intrinsic dignity, the same dignity as myself, then my use of language can be to really try to understand the world from their point of view, to really try to listen, to really try to communicate as honestly and as openly as possible in order for a community of understanding to develop. Right? And if we're going to have peace in this world, we've got to have dialogue directed toward mutual understanding, because the language of the world, the languages, the talk of the world is anything but that right now. Right? It's a Facebook and the social media and so on are places where anything except mutual understanding is cultivated, right? Fear and hate and misinformation and violence and so on. All of that are consequences of language, the use of language right now on a worldwide scale.